Daniel knelt on the living room floor, the Michigan dusk filtering through the blinds, a battered copy of the Velveteen Rabbit open in his hands as Ethan, his 5-year-old son, nestled against him, eyes wide with wonder. At 34, Daniel had built a quiet life in this suburban rental, its walls lined with crayon drawings and secondhand books. A sanctuary stitched together after he'd adopted Ethan, abandoned at 2, left in a car seat outside an orphanage with no note, no name. Daniel, a gay man with a soft voice and softer hands, worked at a daycare, trading steel-toed boots for story times and scraped knees, a choice that lit up his days but darkened every family gathering. To his father, Raymond, a grizzled ex-steelworker with a handshake like a vice, Daniel wasn't a man, he was a disgrace, too soft to carry the family name. The house on Pine Street smelled of oatmeal and lavender, a far cry from the oil and smoke of Raymond's world, where men fixed engines, not feelings. Daniel had come out at 20, a quiet confession met with his dad's sneer, "You'll grow out of it," and a decade of jabs that never dulled. He'd adopted Ethan 3 years ago, a choice that baffled his kin, Raymond most of all. "Real men don't play house with dolls," he'd growl, his voice a hammer at every reunion, the clan nodding along, uncles smirking, aunts whispering. Daniel took it, head down, his silence a shield for Ethan, who'd toddle over with a grin, oblivious to the barbs. He'd learned to weather it. Thanksgiving taunts, Christmas digs, because Ethan's laughter was worth more than their approval. But the cuts ran deep. Last summer's barbecue still stung, the backyard thick with smoke and beer, Raymond holding court by the grill. "Look at him," he'd barked, jerking a thumb at Daniel, cradling Ethan, wiping ketchup from the boy's chin. "A woman in a man's skin pathetic." The laughter roared, cousins piling on. "Bet he braids hair too." And Daniel froze, Ethan squirming in his arms, the weight of their scorn a stone in his chest. He'd smiled, faint and forced, murmuring, "Time for a nap, bud," and slipped inside, the screen door slamming on their jeers. Alone, he'd pressed his forehead to the cool sink, breathing slow, the words soft, a brand he couldn't scrub off. Ethan's tiny hand on his cheek had pulled him back, a lifeline he clung to, but the doubt lingered. Maybe they were right. Then came the letter from Ethan's school, slipped under the door like a whisper of hope. At 8, Ethan had been picked to speak at the spring program, Heroes in My Heart, a stage for kids to shine. Daniel read it twice, his coffee trembling, pride swelling through the cracks Raymond had carved. Ethan beamed, tugging in his sleeve. "I'm gonna talk about you, Dad." And Daniel's throat tightened, a flicker of defiance sparking. Family would be there, Raymond too, his judgment a shadow waiting to fall. But as Ethan hugged him, small arms fierce, Daniel felt it a chance maybe to stand tall, not for them, but for the boy who saw no shame in his softness. The stage loomed, a battleground he hadn't chosen, and Daniel braced himself, knowing this time, silence might not be enough. Ever been told you're not enough? Share below, we're with you. If Daniel's fight hooks you, hit like, share this, and subscribe to Heart Stories. Ethan's about to speak, don't miss what's next. Daniel slouched in the back row of the elementary school auditorium, the Michigan spring air thick with the scent of polished wood and nervous chatter, his hands twisting the program for Ethan's spring showcase. At 34, he'd weathered years of his family's scorn, Raymond's barbs about his softness, the uncle's smirks, the aunt's whispers, but tonight felt heavier, the stakes higher. Ethan, his 8-year-old son, was set to close the program, Heroes in My Heart, with a speech Daniel hadn't heard, a secret the boy had guarded with a shy grin. The room buzzed, parents craning necks, kids fidgeting in plastic chairs, and Daniel sat alone, his gray hoodie a shield against the eyes he knew would judge him. He'd slipped in late, avoiding the front where his family clustered, their voices already a low hum of disdain he could feel from here. The stage glowed, a patchwork of construction paper stars and drooping banners, each kid stepping up with tales of firefighters or grandpas, their voices wobbling through the mic. Daniel's chest tightened with pride as Ethan's turn loomed, the program crinkling in his grip, his mind replaying the call from the teacher. "He insisted on you, Mr. Carter. It's special." He'd adopted Ethan 6 years ago, a 2-year-old left like trash, and built a life of bedtime stories and pancake mornings, a life Raymond called weak. Now that life was about to take the stage, and Daniel braced himself, his heart a drumbeat against the dread of his dad's presence. Raymond, here not to cheer but to critique, a shadow he couldn't outrun. The family had arrived in force, a row of broad shoulders and loud laughs, Raymond at the center, his steel gray hair catching the light, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Let's see if this kid's learned anything from his dad," he'd said as they filed in, the word dripping with mockery, aunts tittering, Uncle Joe nodding like it was a punchline. Daniel caught it from his corner, each syllable a jab he'd heard too often. Too soft. Not a man, and sank lower, his eyes on the floor, the old reflex to shrink kicking in. But Ethan's name crackled through the speakers, the principal beaming, "Our final speaker, Ethan Carter." And Daniel's head snapped up, his breath hitching as his boy climbed the steps, a small figure in a too big blazer, clutching a crumpled paper. Ethan stood, the mic dwarfing him, his dark hair mussed, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on Daniel A. Spark that steadied him. The crowd hushed, waiting, and Raymond leaned forward, arms crossed, his growl cutting through. "Kid looks like a stray up there takes after his old man, huh?" The words landed, sharp and deliberate, a blade aimed at both of them, and a ripple of laughter broke from the family row, a few parents nearby joining in, their chuckles a cold echo. Daniel's fists clenched, the program tearing under his fingers, every instinct screaming to duck, to hide, to let it pass like always. He'd taken it for Ethan's sake, kept the peace to shield his son, but tonight those knives sliced deeper, carving into the man he'd fought to be, the dad Ethan deserved. He could have stood, could have walked out, the exit just steps away, but something held him. Ethan's gaze, steady and sure, a lifeline pulling him from the dark. The laughter faded, the room tilting as Ethan adjusted the mic, his small hands trembling, but his voice clear. Daniel met his eyes, a silent promise passing between them, and for the first time, he didn't look away. Raymond's sneer loomed, the family's jeers a chorus he'd memorized, but Daniel straightened, shoulders squaring, his hoodie no longer a cloak. He wouldn't run. Not tonight, not from this. Ethan's lips parted, the first word hanging in the air, and Daniel braced himself, knowing whatever came next, his son was about to speak for them both, and he'd damn well stay to hear it. The auditorium lights flickered, the crowd leaned in, and Daniel felt it, a shift, a crack in the wall he'd built to survive. Raymond's voice had cut him open, but Ethan's was about to stitch him back, and for once, Daniel wouldn't let those knives carve him down. He sat taller, eyes locked on his boy, ready for a fight he'd never dared before, not against his dad, but for the man he'd become, the dad he was, soft or not. Daniel sat rigid in the back row of the auditorium, the Michigan spring light fading through the high windows, his hands clenched around the torn program as Ethan stood center stage, a small silhouette against the glare of the spotlight. At 34, he'd faced Raymond's scorn 100 times, too soft. Not a man, each jab a splinter under his skin. But tonight, with Ethan up there, those words felt sharper, heavier, a weight he'd carried for his son's sake. The room buzzed, parents whispering, Raymond's growl still echoing, like a stray takes after his old man. The laughter a cold ripple that had nearly broken him. But Ethan's eyes found his through the crowd, a steady brown anchor in the storm, and Daniel held that gaze, his breath shallow, waiting for the boy he'd raised to speak. Ethan shifted, the mic too big for his 8-year-old hands, his blazer sagging at the shoulders, a paper trembling as he unfolded it. The auditorium hushed, the rustle of programs fading, every eye on the kid closing the Heroes in My Heart showcase. He cleared his throat, a small sound swallowed by the silence, and then began, his voice wobbly but clear. "My hero isn't a firefighter or a soldier," he said, glancing at Daniel, a flicker of a smile breaking through. "He's my dad. People say he's too soft to be a real man, because he works at daycare, reads me stories, makes me pancakes with smiley faces." A few parents chuckled, soft and warm, but Raymond's row stayed stone-faced, his arms crossed tight, his jaw a line of steel. He doesn't yell or fight, Ethan went on, his voice growing, the tremor fading. When kids at school pushed me, he taught me to walk away. When I had nightmares, he sat by my bed till I fell asleep. People laugh at him for that, say it's weak. But if being soft means he's there every day, if it means he didn't leave me when I didn't have anybody, then I want to be soft like him when I grow up. The words landed, simple and raw, a quiet thunder rolling through the room. Daniel's chest seized, his throat burning, tears pricking as Ethan's truth cut through years of shame. The laughter died, Raymond's sneer faltering, the air shifting as heads turned, eyes softening, a few hands brushing cheeks. Ethan paused, his paper crinkling, his gaze steady on Daniel now, unwavering. I was left outside when I was little, all alone. Dad found me, took me home. He's not big or loud, but he's strong, stronger than anybody who laughs. He's my hero because he stayed. The mic dropped a fraction, his small chest heaving, and he finished, voice rising. If that's soft, then soft's the best thing a dad can be. Silence crashed in, thick and heavy, no claps, no whispers, just a stillness that pressed against Daniel's ribs. A mom in the third row sniffed. A dad beside her nodded slow, tears glinting in the dim light, and Daniel sat, frozen, his own tears spilling hot down his face, unchecked, unhidden. For the first time, he didn't duck, didn't shrink. Ethan's words, those small, fierce words, wrapped around him, a shield he'd never dared claim. He'd raised this boy alone, a gay man in a world that mocked his softness. And here was Ethan, standing tall, turning that mockery into pride. Raymond shifted, his chair creaking, his eyes darting away. The family row, a wall of stunned faces. No smirks, no jabs, just a quiet that felt like surrender. The principal stepped up, voice thick. "Thank you, Ethan." And the room erupted, applause bursting like a dam breaking, hands clapping, feet stomping, a roar that shook the rafters. Daniel stayed seated, tears streaming, his hoodie damp, pride swelling through the cracks Raymond had carved. Ethan hopped down, weaving through the crowd, and flung himself into Daniel's arms, the blazer flapping, his grin wide. "Did I do okay, Dad?" he whispered, and Daniel pulled him close, voice breaking. "You did more than okay, bud. You were perfect." The claps faded, eyes turned their way. Warm now, not cold, and Daniel held his son, the weight of soft lifting, a burden he'd never carry alone again. Raymond's shadow loomed, a question unanswered, but Daniel didn't look up. Ethan had spoken, and that was enough. Truth louder than any knife, a change he'd feel forever. Daniel stood at the edge of the auditorium, the Michigan spring air cooling his damp cheeks, Ethan's small hand still warm in his as the applause for Heroes in My Heart faded into a hum of chatter. At 34, he'd just heard his 8-year-old son turn years of scorn, too soft. Not a man into a shield, Ethan's speech a quiet thunder that had silenced the room, shifted the crowd, and left Daniel raw with pride. The stage lights dimmed, the paper stars drooping overhead, and parents milled around, their voices a soft buzz. Some casting warm glances his way, others wiping eyes. A tide of respect he'd never felt from his own kin. Ethan tugged his sleeve, grinning. "Can we get ice cream now, Dad?" And Daniel nodded, voice thick. "Yeah, bud, soon." His heart still reeling from the boy who'd stood up for him when he couldn't. The crowd parted, kids scampering to their families, but Raymond lingered, a broad shadow in the third row, his steel gray hair catching the flicker of the exit sign. Daniel braced himself, Ethan's words, "Soft's the best thing a dad can be," still ringing, a lifeline against the storm he knew was coming. Raymond hadn't clapped, his hands stayed locked across his chest as the room erupted, his face a slab of stone while others stood, cheered, wept. But he didn't leave either, his boots rooted to the hardwood, his knuckles white around the chair's edge, a stillness that felt louder than his usual barbs. The family row uncles, aunts, cousins, shifted awkwardly, their smirks gone, their eyes darting between father and son, a tension Daniel could taste, bitter and sharp. Parents approached, a slow stream breaking the silence. A mom in a denim jacket, her voice soft. "Your boy's something special, Mr. Carter." a dad with a toddler on his hip, nodding. Takes a real man to raise a kid like that. Daniel shook hands, his hoodie sleeve brushing Ethan's hair, each word a balm on wounds Raymond had carved. Thanks, he murmured, his smile shaky, Ethan beaming beside him, oblivious to the weight of their praise. The line grew, teachers joining in, the principal clapping his shoulder. Ethan's speech was the heart of this, and Daniel stood taller, his chest loosening. The softness he'd borne as shame, now a badge he didn't need to hide. But Raymond loomed, a storm cloud unmoving, his silence a question Daniel couldn't answer. Then the crowd thinned, and Raymond moved, his steps heavy, deliberate, the auditorium's hum fading as he closed the gap. Daniel tensed, Ethan clutching his hand tighter, the old reflex to shrink clawing up his spine. He'd heard it all, pathetic, weak, and braced for more, expecting the growl, the sneer, the knife. Raymond stopped, inches away, his broad frame towering, his eyes red-rimmed, not with rage, but something softer, something cracked. I don't get you, he said, voice low, gravelly, the words slow like they hurt to push out. Never did. Thought you'd ruin that kid, raising him like that. He paused, jaw working, glancing at Ethan, then back. But I saw him up there, stood for you. Maybe I got it wrong. Daniel froze, the air thick between them. Raymond's words a jagged edge, not an apology, not quite, but a fracture in the wall he'd built. Ethan tilted his head, curious. Your grandpa, right? And Raymond flinched, a flicker crossing his face, his hand twitching like he might reach out, but didn't. Yeah, kid, he muttered, eyes dropping, then lifting to Daniel's. I ain't saying I'm sold, but he's good. You did that. He turned, boots scuffing the floor, and walked off, shoulders hunched, the exit swallowing him whole. No handshake, no tears, just a crack, a sliver of light where darkness had been, a door ajar Daniel hadn't dared hope for. Ethan squeezed his hand, tugging again. Ice cream now? And Daniel laughed, a sound that broke free, light and real. Yeah, let's go, he said, leading them out, the crowd's warmth lingering. Raymond's retreat a shadow he didn't chase. Parents waved, smiles followed, and Daniel felt it, the weight lifting, not gone, but lighter. Raymond hadn't clapped, hadn't bent, but he couldn't leave, and that was enough, a shift, a start, a truth Ethan had carved into the silence. Daniel held his son close, the night stretching ahead, and for once, the knives didn't cut. He'd stood still, and Ethan had stood tall, and together they'd changed something no words could undo. Daniel stood backstage at the Lansing Community Center, the Michigan autumn crisp through the open door, his fingers brushing the worn collar of a shirt his mom had sewn for his high school graduation, a faded blue thing he'd never worn until tonight. At 34, he'd stepped into a spotlight he hadn't sought, Ethan's speech from the school showcase rippling beyond that night, landing them here, a regional event for orphaned kids and single parents, where his 8-year-old son was invited to speak again. The room thrummed with voices, chairs scraping, a banner overhead reading, Family Found, and Daniel watched Ethan adjust his tie, the boy's grin a mirror of the pride swelling in his chest. Raymond's words at the school, maybe I got it wrong, had cracked a wall, but Daniel wasn't here for his dad. He was here for Ethan, for himself, for the man he'd finally stopped doubting. The week had blurred since that auditorium night. Ethan's words, soft's the best thing a dad can be, echoing in Daniel's ears, a balm that steadied him through the calls that followed. Organizers, teachers, parents, all moved by a boy who'd turned weakness into worth. Tonight, Ethan would share that again, and Daniel wore the shirt like a quiet vow. It stitches a thread to a mother who'd loved him silently, a past he could reclaim. He'd spent years shrinking under Raymond's shadow, too soft, pathetic, but Ethan's voice had lifted him, and the hands he'd shaken, the tears he had seen, proved it. He wasn't the failure his dad saw. He was enough, more than enough, and this stage was theirs. Ethan bounded up, the mic crackling as he started, his small frame steady now, his voice clear. I talked about my dad before, he said, glancing back at Daniel, a smile flickering. He's not loud or tough, but he's my hero. He didn't have to take me in, but he did. I don't need a perfect dad, just one who stays. The crowd leaned in, a hush falling, and Daniel's throat tightened, pride and love a knot he couldn't untangle. Ethan finished, strong and sure. He's the kind of dad everyone deserves, one who's there. Applause broke, a wave crashing over the room, hands rising, cheers lifting, and Daniel stood, eyes wet, the shirt snug against his shoulders, a fit he'd earned. Then a volunteer slipped through the wings, her hand outstretched, a folded paper pressed into his palm. "Someone left this," she whispered, gone before he could ask. Daniel unfolded it, his breath catching at the scrawl, Raymond's blocky hand, unmistakable. "I ain't good with words, but I'm here. Don't tell the kid, Raymond." His head snapped up, scanning the crowd, and there in the back, half hidden by a pillar, stood his dad, cap pulled low, jacket hunched, eyes fixed on Ethan, then flicking to Daniel. No wave, no nod, just a presence, a shadow that didn't clap, didn't cheer, but stayed a twist Daniel hadn't braced for, a quiet echo of that night he couldn't leave. The room stood, ovation thundering, Ethan running back to hug him, arms fierce around his waist. "We did it, Dad," he chirped, and Daniel knelt, pulling him close. "Yeah, we did, bud." He didn't look for Raymond again, didn't need to. The note burned in his pocket, a confession too small to heal, too big to ignore. His dad was there, unseen, unheard, a man who'd mocked him now watching in silence. And that was enough. A crack, not a bridge, a step Daniel hadn't asked for. The crowd's roar faded, Ethan's warmth grounding him, and he rose, the shirt a second skin, his heart full. He wasn't too soft, not for Ethan, not for this world. He was the father who stayed, who loved through the taunts, who built a home from nothing. Raymond's eyes might linger, but Ethan's shone brighter, a light no shadow could dim. The stage emptied, the night stretched on, and Daniel walked out, hand in Ethan's, free of the weight he'd carried too long. He'd been called weak, but his son had proved them wrong, and that truth, soft, steady, unbreakable, was all he'd ever need. Who's your unsung hero? Tell us below, we want to hear. If Daniel and Ethan's story touches you, please like, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Heart Stories. Join us. Let's keep these hearts